Joining me again is, of course, Dan Schorr. He's also a managing director at Ankara. So, Dan, I'm glad you're here. I'm glad you're talking about it. Weird case, right? Weird case for the prosecution. And tell me if I'm wrong here. They have to work a certain line because they're not accusing him of murder. They're not accusing him here of disposing of the body. I mean, that's not what he's charged with in this trial. How much can they bring that up as they try to make the claim that he lied to investigators? Isn't it a weird road for them to go?
Right. They don't want to give evidence that's going to be prejudicial against the defendant because that can lead to a mistrial or something overturned on appeal. But certainly that's going to be part of the case because to explain that he lied to the police, they have to say, why did he lie? Why was there a motive for him to lie? And the gravity of knowing someone who allegedly killed the victim here is part of his motive to lie. So that will have to be mentioned. I would expect the judge would give a limiting instruction to the jury at the end saying, if you heard evidence about a murder, you can't use that as a reason to convict the defendant. You have to show that he actually lied to the police.
Making false statements to officers, hindering apprehension or punishment of a criminal, and concealing the death of another. I am told this is called process crimes. Are these easy to prove?
Well, just like any other crime, you have to have evidence that it actually happened. So it's not that it's easy or hard, but it's about, are there other witnesses? Apparently there might be a girlfriend or an ex-girlfriend who says that he admitted to this. But if you can prove beyond a reasonable doubt that he made false statements, then you can prove that.
Took the words right out of my mouth. You're talking, of course, about Kim Sheridan. So she is Duke's girlfriend's mother, testified yesterday that Bo admitted to helping dispose of the body. Not a good day for the defense.
Sure, that's certainly powerful. And you wonder if the prosecution's endgame is if they get a conviction here, then the defendant may become a cooperating witness before sentencing and testify against Ryan Duke in a subsequent trial where he's actually accused of a killing. That may be one reason that they are doing this trial first.
I'm glad you mentioned that because Ryan Duke, the alleged killer, is waiting to go on trial, I think, April 1st. That's only a few weeks away. Do you feel they're rushing this trial? I mean, let's talk about this. So they found a jury yesterday. Opening statements, first witness in under 45 minutes. We're about to go live, very early morning start. Are they rushing this trial through to see if maybe they can get a plea deal out of him? Maybe he'll start beginning to cooperate. Something might happen.
It doesn't look like there'll be a plea deal, but if they get a conviction before sentencing, we see this all the time. There might be an agreement where they'd have an agreed upon sentence in return for cooperation in the other trial. The other trial is supposed to start at the beginning of April, but those always can get pushed back.
All right, as we listen to the first witness of the day, let's just take a step back. Dan, what is the defense arguing here? Are they just saying that the prosecution doesn't have enough evidence to prove anything here?
Right, and that's a standard argument in any case. You're always going to make those arguments that the case, even if you believe everything from the prosecution's perspective, it's not enough to prove beyond a reasonable doubt. That's not going to be successful here. There's going to be testimony. You're going to see the full prosecution's case, and then we'll see if the defendant wants to testify after that. Dan,
as we watch this trial, this is a big moment for this community. I think I was told that this is actually a small kind of courthouse. They have one, trial, per week in a very small town. What do you think this trial really means in this whole situation for this community?
Well, it's a small place, and one of the difficulties, and we saw this in picking the jury, is people know each other, that a lot of the potential jurors knew one of the people involved because it's a small town. It's a courthouse that doesn't have a lot of experience trying cases. They try a case 1 week a month or something like that, and if it doesn't, that's why they're moving efficiently. They're trying to get this done this week. So it's interesting. It's different than what we see in the big cities where there are a million courtrooms and a lot of judges and a lot of trials going on.
That's a great thing about, I think, what we do here is really get a sense of how the judicial system works all throughout the country, not just Florida. I know we cover a lot of Florida trials, but Georgia as well. Okay, some pretty incredible testimony right there. Dan, your reaction to what we're hearing?
Well, it's amazing if he's telling the truth. First of all, you have this basic confession from the defendant, which is powerful, but then he was trying to reach out to law enforcement, he says, and he couldn't get law enforcement to pay attention to this information that he had, and then the case dragged on for years. So that is really compelling testimony for both of those reasons.
This was a cold case, but I guess why did it have to be a cold case? Was it the idea that investigators just didn't believe every tip that was coming forward? I know there were some hoaxes going around and talking about what happened to Tara Grinstead.
Maybe they were overwhelmed with tips, but you have billboards asking for information. He says he called multiple times to the police, that he used Facebook to communicate with them, and he couldn't get a response. And he was saying, I have information about that teacher who disappeared. And he's saying the police didn't respond until years later. That is really stunning.
Okay, joining me now for some perspective as we wait to go back live again is Dan Schorr, law and crime trial analyst and also managing director at Ankara. Dan, cross-examination here, I think they're doing a pretty good job. What did you pick of what they're saying right now?
Sure. It's impossible for the defense to credibly argue that there was no conversation between the defendant and this witness about the murder. But what the defense is trying to show that he didn't, even though he contacted police, he didn't do it with enough follow-up that shows that this really happened to the degree that the witness is saying. And also, he's focusing on the intoxication of the defendant at the time. So the defense argument seems to be a combination of he was really intoxicated, so maybe he was exaggerating a little, and maybe he didn't say all the things that this witness was saying he said, and that's why he didn't pursue it with the police more, even though he says he followed up with the police multiple times.
If you take his word for it, why didn't investigators really take more of his word? I came up with the idea maybe they've been getting so many false tips in this case. I mean, there's been a lot of speculation and theories and rumors about what happened to Tara Grinstead, and you can imagine maybe that's what happened. But what do you make of that?
Right, there are billboards everywhere. There are a lot of tips, and this one fell between the cracks, and this was a huge mistake.
Right.
And that's one thing that you don't see on TV about law enforcement, just the reassigning of people who are handling cases. You talked about how one person was handling the investigation, then that person got moved off, then another person got moved off, and he was having trouble connecting with someone from law enforcement who was actively working on that. That's the reality of law enforcement, that personnel change, there are a lot of tips, there's only a certain limited amount of manpower, even in a high-profile case like this. Unfortunately, things fall through the cracks, and it seems like that led to this being a cold case for years when it might not have been that way if they had followed up earlier.
I mean, we're talking about, she disappeared 2005, 2017 is when Ryan Duke gets charged, and then Bo Dukes gets charged. Really interesting scenario. Okay, so that was from earlier. Dan, you've heard now the cross-examination. Do you think he comes off as a credible witness?
He comes across very credible. He gives a lot of details. It's not just that the defendant told me that he was involved with covering up a body, but he gives details about talking about the temperature at which the body would have to burn, how it was a slow process. So he also talks about how he followed up with the police multiple times. So he comes across credible. I think the defense realizes that. So the defense has to undermine his testimony by saying that the defendant was intoxicated and maybe exaggerating, and maybe he didn't say all the things this witness says he said, and that's why the witness didn't follow up again and again and drive to the police station. Even though he did follow up, they're trying to say, why didn't you follow up more? Why didn't you drive there? And he's saying, well, I called them multiple times. I contacted them through Facebook. The defense is trying to show if you really said all these things, you would have done even more. Okay,
so Dan, I got to ask you this. I guess I'm still confused. Maybe you could help it. They are not charging him in this case. It is not about disposing of the body. It's not about the burning of the body. But yet, don't they have to establish that? Because if they can establish that fact, then they can show that he was lying to investigators, which the real charge is, but jurors are not supposed to make a decision about whether or not he did this. Why am I confused? Are you confused?
Well, that's a great point. If they can show that he helped dispose of the body, why don't they charge that? And certainly to show that he lied about disposing of the body, they'll have to show that he lied about disposing of the body and therefore disposed of the body.
Right.
So I don't know why they didn't charge that. Maybe they feel like
they charge that in the county where the burning actually happened. So I get that.
Yeah.
But what is a jury supposed to be thinking? Do they take what he said and say, oh, yeah, well, based upon his testimony, yes, he burned the body.
Right, and also it might be sufficient in terms of the sentence they're looking for to charge him with lying to the police, and they may feel that's an easier, neater case. They're going to prove that by the statements to the police, the statements to other people, such as the witness you just heard. The jury's going to hear about it, and the jury's, look, part of the prosecution case here is talking about the murder, talking about the body that was disposed of, and talking about how this was a real person. One of the earlier witnesses you heard from the prosecution was about showing this was a real human being that was killed and personalizing it and making it real to the jury, and that helps. It can't be in a prejudicial way, but it certainly helps make the jury see this as a really important case and take it seriously.
Is there going to be overlap between this trial and his second trial in that other county in terms of witnesses and testimony?
Probably, and that sometimes can benefit the defense because they get a preview of the testimony. But it also depends on if the defendant is convicted here, maybe there's no need for a second trial in the other county.
All right, Dan, let's break this down right now because there was a lot that just happened. I want to just talk about the cross-examination. Obviously, he admitted something really big on direct. We see the theme by the prosecution, bringing out witnesses who've said that Bo Dukes confessed to them about helping dispose of the body. But the idea that he was so intoxicated that he didn't remember what happened and what he said. You and I had talked about something else that they could have jumped on, the idea that he's a liar and he likes to boast, but they didn't jump on that.
Right, he said growing up he's been boastful, he says things that aren't necessarily true. The defense may come back to that in their closing argument and say, you remember this witness, he said he boasts a lot, he grew up boasting. But I guess he didn't want to follow up on that at this point for some reason. The intoxication is interesting because we see that in a lot of cases where people make confessions allegedly while intoxicated, and the defense tries to show, well, he was intoxicated, he could have just been saying things that weren't true. And on the other hand, as we all know, sometimes intoxication is almost like a truth serum, that people say things that they wouldn't ordinarily say, like, hey, let me tell you about this body I helped get rid of. And apparently there's two people who say he talked about that when he was intoxicated.
If you're sitting in the jury, would you be a little skeptical of the idea that this guy keeps telling a lot of people what he did?
Right, now you have two people who say on different, and they don't know each other. That's key.
Three people now. Let's not forget what happened in the first day. His former girlfriend's mother said that.
And you have two today, and they're all saying that he made these comments. It seems like he made these comments. There's no way the defense can say he didn't make these comments. What they can say is he's this boastful guy who, when he gets drunk, says things that aren't really true.
Another huge moment in this trial, another huge witness for the prosecution. Dan, I mean, this guy is going to be huge in the Ryan Duke trial. I mean, you were talking about his brother, testified to. But what did he testify to, if you think about it? It seems almost an offhand remark on the part of the defendant as something more concrete from what we heard in other witnesses.
Right, but the defendant making a statement to him allegedly saying that he knows that his brother committed the murder shows that this defendant had knowledge of that killing, and that's consistent with him being a part of the cover-up of that killing, disposing of the body.
What was the defense trying to do under cross-examination?
The defense is trying to show that maybe there was an alibi that he was a part of, and maybe his brother did not take part in the killing, and if that's true, if he was an alibi witness, then maybe this whole thing isn't true, that maybe the defendant didn't help his brother get rid of the body. It doesn't seem like it really all meshes together very well, because this defendant is clearly telling multiple people that he was a part of this, that he knew about this killing, that he was part of it, and we don't know why he would do that if it wasn't somewhat true. Maybe he exaggerated, maybe he embellishes, as one witness said, but it's hard to believe that he just made this out of nothing.
What you are getting a sense of is, imagine if you're a viewer out there, you're listening to this, and someone comes to you with information, how do you take somebody seriously or not? I mean, is that one of the reasons there was such a delay and this was such a cold case and they weren't arrested until 2017? Because who takes this seriously, this kind of statement?
Well, it seems like it varies from witnesses. The military friend, McCullough, he said that he did try to contact the police and no one responded in a really thorough way. We've heard from other witnesses, too, today that they didn't take it seriously, that he was someone who embellished, wasn't credible. When he is intoxicated and says, oh, I was a part of covering up a body, or your brother killed someone, that wasn't taken seriously. If someone just came up to you at a party and said, hey, you know who killed this missing woman? Your brother did.
What a day it has been listening to the witness after witness after witness. I mean, are you getting the sense they're rushing through this trial? I mean, you don't expect this to be a long series of days?
You know, the way they're rushing it, but it doesn't feel rushed. It seems like they're being efficient. They're getting right to the point. Sometimes you see lawyers question people, sometimes for hours, and you're like, when are they going to get to the point? They're getting right to the point. The defense is getting right to the point, and that's moving this quickly.
Because it's such a specific mandate, specific charges, process crimes.
And also both teams of lawyers seem to be doing very well and very efficient jobs of asking questions.
They've had time to prepare this, and a lot of people are watching. Dan, thanks so much for coming on. Appreciate your insight as always.
Fascinating day. I'll be watching.
All right, everybody, we're going to take a quick break.